So what we're going to do is just, it's just a short session of anything that you think would contribute to the forum that might be of interest, a question if you'd like to pose to other people. And we'll do this for about, well, up to 30 minutes for as long as you can deal with it. And then what we're going to be doing is having a fairly open and frank discussion session where what I'm actually going to do, I was thinking about this before, I was going to sort of make it Q&A, but I find that sometimes can be quite daunting for people, is I'm going to put you in groups of sort of 4 or 5 people to talk about some things I'm going to give you to talk about, and then to basically, for about 20 minutes, and then to report back to the group on what your group came up with. So that puts a little bit more pressure. I'll come to that in a moment, but we'll spend just sort of 20 to 30 minutes now on lightning talk. So, would you like to start? And if I can ask, so what we'll do is we'll go yourself, and then, hold on, who was the second? You came second, yes. Then you came third. Who was my fourth person? My fourth person was you. You're fourth.
No take-backs.
Yes? No take-backs. And then someone over here is 5. Okay, and then if anyone else wants to, that'd be cool. So if I can ask, in the order that you've just been delegated, if you could make sure you come up and be ready to go straight after the person just in front of you, that'd be good. Speak into the lectern and have fun.
I just want to talk about a particular data set that I worked for the New Zealand Institute of Plant and Food Research in Lincoln, just outside of Christchurch, New Zealand. I was working on a database called the New Zealand Food Composition Database, and the New Zealand Ministry of Health had been given us lots of money to analyse foods and then put the nutritional information on thousands of foods, so you can go and get the food analysis of a tomato or a steak or whatever. And I saw all this data and thought, this should be available to everybody. So I started harassing people and harassing some of the senior management of the institute, and they finally relented. And now you can go to a website called foodcomposition.co.nz, and although you have to download it and the way they want you to do it is download it in Windows and then tick a whole bunch of things saying that you're never ever going to do anything with the data ever, but that's not but that's just lawyers for you. You can I think it's an all care no responsibility license is what they finally agreed to. You can download it, and I can't remember the format, but anyway, it'll open up with a Linux archive tool, and you don't have to agree. But anyway, it gives you the full data analysis of about 2,500 foods and about 300 odd nutrients in each food, like 30 odd different sugars and about 100 different fatty acids and all the rest of it. But you can narrow it down to the stuff that actually means something to most people. It's a useful data set, which, so we especially put it together for New Zealanders, but Aussies as well. Yeah.
Should we eat tomatoes as well?
Hey?
We eat tomatoes as well.
Yeah, but the big thing about New Zealand is, though, its big problem is that it has no iodine in the soil and no selenium, and nobody else in the world cares about iodine or selenium, but New Zealand does. So that's one of the things we...
WA's got the same selenium problem.
Oh, okay, right. Yeah, well, it's sort of different parts of the world care about different things, but yeah.
That's fascinating. Cool. Thank you very much. Would you mind adding that to the wiki, or tweeting it, or sending it to me in the email, or something?
Okay, right.
Just so I can add it. I think, yeah, or someone tweeting it, that'd be cool. All right, we'll clap people all at the end. Done.
Hi, my name is Peter Ingleson from Wildlife Officer. Peter made the point this morning, WA don't really have a government commitment as yet to an open data policy, but I did just want to reassure that in the spatial data world, at least, the West Australian Land Information System, or Location Information System, I should say, or WALLIS, as it's perhaps more generally known, have been practising an open data philosophy for probably 30 years. So we've been sharing and had an established community which does share and very much practices sharing and caring for spatial data. And that was enabled via the SLIP environment Pierre alluded to in 2007. That's undergoing a major redevelopment, and there'll be a new release of the SLIP environment based on the Google's Map Engine interface, hoping to go live sometime this year. And there was a scaled down and very public-facing version of that released in December, Keith, wasn't it? Yeah. Or Locate WA? Yeah. November. So that's, and if you haven't had a look at that and you're from WA, I'd encourage you to go and have a look at that, which is locatewa.wa.gov.au. Yeah. Just Google it, yeah, and you'll find it.
Wiki.
Yeah, and again, and that's where the new SLIP environment, the spatial data environment, is heading. And just to add to that, and we are developing policies, open data policies in respect of the that spatial data environment as well. So that's just a quick update.
Fantastic, thank you very much.
My name's Paul Hamilton. I've used to work in local government and in IT, sysadmin, and there's a local government IT group that meets once a year in Coffs Harbour. So about 250 IT managers meet there. And it always used to amaze me that we're all sitting there, and I suppose this is the same for federal and state government and other agencies, that we're all sitting there trying to invent the wheel, dealing with the same kind of policies and everything. And I was wondering, I did a bit of an envelope calculation once, trying to calculate how much we spend on Microsoft software, just say plain Office. And it came up into the millions and millions of dollars. And it was just back of envelope, looking at my costs, and then from a small shire, and then calculating out across WA, 144 shires, and then across Australia. So I was wondering why, this is perhaps more policy, I don't know, but why a government agency couldn't set up like a master help desk or something, maybe a bit like what Victoria's done, I don't know, I haven't followed them for a while, but just why haven't we standardised on some sort of open source software or a range of open source software out there? So it was more a question to you people.
To us people.
Yeah, or to anyone.
Does anyone else want to have a crack at it and then
I'll take that one.
Please. Do you want to come up though to the mic?
Sure.
Yes, you totally do.
Yes,
Thank you.
First of all, Pierre, you need coffee and you need water.
Oh my god, yeah, you got to go for me. I'm really sorry, everyone. I've been really tired. Thank you so much.
I have cake too.
I got cake. Oh my god.
You get cake because you're awesome. Microrange. Okay. Sorry, I don't know who was asking. Okay. I think this one's probably a multifold question, and the reason that local government hasn't adopted a range of open source solutions, it's because of a pipeline. So if I look at discovery to deployment, if I look at the discovery to deployment pipeline, first of all, you as a sector, as a cohort, may not know what's out there. Then you may not know how to use that software, you may not know how to support that software, and you may not know how to deploy that software. If I'm going with a proprietary solution, as a marketer in a proprietary company, it's my job to make you discover my software. It's my job to shoehorn my software to fit your problem as a solution. And it's my job to do things like readiness, and my job to do things like after-sales support to make sure that you're utilising that software. We don't necessarily have that ecosystem in open source, although that's changing over time. So I think it's about building that pipeline, the search, the discovery, the alignment between enterprise problem and enterprise solution, making sure that the holistic needs of the organisation are thought of. Everyone knows how to use Microsoft Word. Everyone knows how to use Excel. Going from Word to Excel to LibreOffice or to OpenOffice is slightly different. Going from Exchange to Thunderbird, going from IE to Firefox, it's a slightly different experience. So as an open source industry, I think what we need to do is make sure that we're covering off on the pipeline. And I'll stop hogging the microphone.
No, that was great. So there's a couple of other things. Shifting a desktop operating, like shifting the desktop's hard, stupid hard. And in fact, if you want a good case, well, that's where I'm about to get to. Yeah. So, but even shifting Office is hard. So South Australian government a few years ago, and it's very much worth going and talking to the Office of the CIO down there about this experience. I don't think it was documented anywhere yet, but they did like a huge trial of a bunch of Linux operating systems for the desktop for government, which is very, very interesting. But it's hard. It's very, very hard to shift the desktop. Having said that, so my first point is about the shift to cloud services is going to enable a lot of this. Because when your business applications are not reliant upon the operating system or on other parts of that stack, then you can shift a lot of stuff. I mean, for instance, there are a lot of departments in the federal government, yeah, I can say this, who were stuck on IE6 for a long time because there were contracts with a major vendor that I won't name, where the major vendor, and it's not Microsoft, where the major vendor said, we will, our current contract with you is to support your major business application through IE6, and we won't support IE7 or IE8, I think they were up to by that stage, unless you pay us a whole lot more money. So there is a lot of things to take into account. So as things move more into the cloud, I think that's going to create more opportunities. But the second one is, particularly in federal government, particularly for large tenders, a department can only choose from the tenders that are given to it. And if every single tender response comes back, and there is absolutely no variety in the options that come back, then you can only choose from what you're given. Otherwise, it's like you're actually thwarting what is actually supposed to be a reasonable system. So it's important to note that people actually need to put forward tender responses. And at the same time, there's a lot more ways for SMEs, for small businesses, to actually engage with government to do contracting now than there were. So there's still a lot of perspective that it's too hard to work with government, but that's changed a lot just in the last few years. And so a lot of the industry needs to engage more with government and with the opportunities that are available to it. We now have in federal government an SME IT advocate, Don Easter, whose entire job is to look at how to make it easier for SMEs to actually get government business. So that's a whole new thing that's only a couple of years running, and a lot of changes have been made to some of the rules and procurement stuff around to make that easier. So there's a couple of aspects there, but the other one is also just about that, like you say, just collaborating and figuring out how to make it, how to find ways to solve a problem once rather than many, many, many times. Shared services is one of those terms that's become a dirty word because of, a couple of states have had some pretty major issues that have been widely reported. But there's other states and territories who have done it very, very, very well, and that's never reported because no one likes a feel-good story. So getting more, I think, balance in the reporting around what can and can't work, I think, is very important. Now, we had Chung. Yes? So there's a couple of other things. Shifting a desktop operating, shifting the desktop's hard, stupid hard. And in fact, if you want a good case... Well, that's where I'm about to get to. Yeah, but even shifting Office is hard. So South Australian government a few years ago, and it's very much worth going and talking to the Office of the CIO down there about this experience. I don't think it was documented anywhere yet, but they did like a huge trial of a bunch of Linux operating systems for the desktop for government, which is very, very interesting. But it's hard. It's very, very hard to shift the desktop. Having said that, so my first point is about the shift to cloud services is going to enable a lot of this. Because when your business applications are not reliant upon the operating system or on other parts of that stack, then you can shift a lot of stuff. I mean, for instance, there are a lot of departments in the federal government I can say this, who were stuck on IE6 for a long time because there were contracts with a major vendor that I won't name, where the major vendor, and it's not Microsoft, where the major vendor said, we will, our current contract with you is to support your major business application through IE6, and we won't support IE7 or IE8, I think they were up to by that stage, unless you pay us a whole lot more money. So there is a lot of things to take into account. So as things move more into the cloud, I think that's going to create more opportunities. But the second one is, particularly in federal government, particularly for large tenders, a department can only choose from the tenders that are given to it. And if every single tender response comes back, and there is absolutely no variety in the options that come back, then you can only choose from what you're given. Otherwise, it's like otherwise you're actually thwarting what is actually, supposed to be a reasonable system. So it's important to note that, people actually need to put forward tender responses. And at the same time, there's a lot more ways for SMEs, for small businesses, to actually engage with government to do contracting now than there were. So there's still a lot of perspective that it's too hard to work with government, but that's changed a lot just in the last few years. And so a lot of the industry needs to engage more with government and with the opportunities that are available to it. We now have in federal government an SME IT advocate, Don Easter, whose entire job is to look at how to make it easier for SMEs to actually get government business. So that's a whole new thing that's only a couple of years running, and a lot of changes have been made to some of the rules and procurement stuff around to make that easier. So there's a couple of aspects there, but the other one is also just about that, like you say, just collaborating and figuring out how to make it, how to find ways to solve a problem once rather than many, many, many times. Shared services is one of those terms that's become a dirty word because of, a couple of states have had some pretty major issues that have been widely reported. But there's other states and territories who have done it very, very, very well, and that's never reported because no one likes a feel-good story. So getting more, I think, balance in the reporting around what can and can't work, I think, is very important. Now, we had Chung. Yes?
So I'm not going to try and get anything up on the screen, but if you go on the LCA 2014 hashtag, I'm AngryGoat on Twitter, and there's an image there of WA visualised by looting Landgate's WFS service to grab all of their sewer data. So for a reason I won't go into, I wanted the entire sewer network of Western Australia. And Landgate have a WFS service, which is Web Feature Service. I think Keith's not wincing, which lets you grab polygon data, line data in a fully, almost like SVG. Rather than rastered data. But they'll only give you 5,000 points at a time. So I wrote a little tool that you say, give me everything between this latitude and longitude and this latitude and longitude, which, in this case was WA, and it does a WFS request for those, and it knows what the feature limit is. So for 5,000, if it gets 5,000 answers, it goes, aha, wrong, and divides that area up into 4, puts it on the list, and asks for those 4 areas. And the image that you'll get off Twitter is a bunch of little, it's like a quad tree, a bunch of lines of rectangles. What's cool is it actually maps, the sewer network actually maps where the population in the state is. Because where you've gone in a lot is where people need sewer services. But that's the kind of thing you can do to be, obnoxious to government departments that have feature limits and still retain access to all of their data.
I can give you a question.
If you come up to here, you can.
Oh, no.
No. All right, give me the question, I'll repeat it.
Okay. So we've got a whole bunch of people here who are excited about open government data.
Yeah.
How do we get other people excited about it? Is there one killer app, for a better term, that we need?
All right, so the question is, how do the enthusiastic people in this room get other people excited about it, and is there a killer app that we need? Oh, such a big question. So the first thing is doing cool stuff that you can show off, basically. One of the things I found really interesting is the progress of there's a very rapid growing interest in open data across so many spheres now of people who have traditionally never even spoken to each other. So we've got the data journalism taking off. I mean, at a time where one of the major media groups in Australia was firing hundreds of journalists or staff, it was then hiring data journalists, which was a very, very interesting little trend. But we now, pretty much all the major media in Australia now have data journalists working on stuff, and that's fascinating.
What is a data journalist?
So a data journalist, thank you for the good question. A data journalist is a journalist who's focused on the, hopefully, on the analysis of, seeking out of, data visualisation of, and reporting through the use of and presentation of data. So what's starting to happen is, rather than just the traditional, story with maybe a couple of little facts thrown in there, hopefully, and a picture of someone with their baby, you're starting to get a lot more journalism where they have either static or even interactive visualisation of data, so people can start to play around with it and understand what it means more intuitively. Infographics, yes. And it's been really handy because as a geek, as a technical person, I always thought of data visualisation as that wanky thing that you have to do for your manager because they can't be bothered reading your report. But it is actually useful. It is actually, if you start thinking about it from a perspective of you are trying to help someone who is time poor, who doesn't have the scope or interest or focus or time that you've had to research the thing that you've researched. Sorry? Oh, good. Well, in that case.
If you've got millions and millions of data
Yeah.
points, you need some way for a human brain to process those.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, I need to repeat the thing. So yes, if you've got millions of data points, you need a way for people to process it. And data visualization helps not only communicate some very complex ideas in a much more efficient way, but it also, when you start creating the interactive data visualizations, it gives people the ability to start experimenting with, playing with, and engaging with the information and the knowledge that's within the data that they may not otherwise do. So data journalism is becoming a whole practice around using data to do better journalism, which is really cool. So we've got data journalists, we've got open science really starting to take off, and I mean we have a new policy, which I didn't mention before, at the federal level, which says that all research data is supposed to be published publicly within 6 months of the papers being published. That's new. They've never focused on data publishing before. It's always been about the papers, and in fact, paper publishing has been used as an excuse to not publish the research data, because what if someone else takes my research data and does a paper before I do my paper? So, well, not me, but someone. So there's research data and open science stuff happening. There's a whole bunch of stuff happening from a industry perspective of startups picking up and using government data to do cool stuff. So there's most of the average people out there will probably not care about this space. But if you want to get more data from government and you want the ecosystem to grow, then showing it off, doing case studies, requesting data that you actually need, and saying, here's the data that we need, and then after you've got it, showing what you can do with it that's really interesting and really cool. But fundamentally, just doing what you would do anyway, in a lot of ways, just doing it really well and really publicly. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sort of.
Because we're not going to be able to get every single person out there excited about this stuff, but if you can say, well, here is a website or an application or whatever to make it easier to do something. I'll give you an example. One of the federal government departments wanted to do an app to make it easy for you to take the what's it called? The data about the energy efficiency of every electrical device in Australia. So they collect that data on a daily basis, basically. And so they have the huge data set of all the energy efficiency. So they wanted an app so that someone could go into Bing.ly or whatever and say, I want to compare that TV to that TV and make a more informed choice based on energy efficiency, right? That's kind of cool. They were given a quote on how much it would cost to build an API to their existing system. They were given a quote on how much an app would cost. Luckily, I'd already been talking to them. And so they started publishing their data to data.gov.au, which automatically generated, so they publish it in good data format. It automatically generates an API, which means they've just saved that 20K. And then they developed their application to do what they wanted to do, but because other people now have access to the dataset and to the API, a whole bunch of other applications have since spun up as well. So the agency is super happy because they've saved money, delivered what they needed to deliver, but at the same time, a whole bunch of other people are now doing it as well and using their data. So that and them seeing that is very, very handy and very useful and better delivers services and such. Yep.
Sorry, where was that you said the data was published?
Data.gov.au. Data.gov. So hold on. Whee! Here's one I prepared earlier. In fact, and it's updated on a daily basis. So it's updated on a daily basis, actually. So we worked with them to create an automation script so that it pulls the data out on a daily basis and pushes it up to data.gov.au on an automatic basis. So they've saved hours every day, or certainly every month, in updating and publishing what they wanted to publish anyway. You go to data sets. It's usually the top one because it's updated every day. Energy rating for household appliances. Which is kind of cool. I'll show you a couple of other ones as well. Oh, so slow. Okay, hold on. Networks. Oh, that's new. Cool. Oh, that's awesome. We actually published the last 10 years of all government contracts over $10,000 because they're all the ones that have to be reported on publicly. So we've just published the last 10 years worth of that data, or 12, 13 years of that data, which is kind of cool. Anyway, so there you go.
Does that have how much government employees use Facebook?
That, yeah, and we've actually also got a leaderboard of all of the Twitter accounts as well, which gives the top. It basically gives a list of all of the government Twitter accounts and in order of how many followers they've got. And it's kind of fun because we publish that every month. So as in my team publish that every month as a way to sort of get a little bit of competition going with the agencies. Oh, and it's so funny to watch. And it's good because, but it's really good because not only does it get them sort of competing a bit, even though number of followers shouldn't be something you compete on. I mean, if I went and tweeted something superbly embarrassing, then that would get a lot of followers, but it's not necessarily the success criteria I want to be judged on, right? But it also gets them knowing who else is doing stuff. Which means that they can start sharing experience sort of across agencies and start saying, oh, well, I've got this tricky problem, how do I deal with it? And rather than having to do it in isolation, they can work with other agencies to do it. So that's kind of cool. Okay. So yeah, so basically just do cool stuff is the simple answer. When I go to Treasury and say, so we've got one of the data requests on the data.gov.au data request site, which I'll show you. Again, here's one I prepared earlier. I can also say, by the way, people have screen scraped all the portfolio budget statements and have actually published not only the CSV but an API and and a data visualization of the federal budget, which, by the way, is wrong because of screen scraping means that some of the characters are out, which means that there's not, that is the data set everyone's using, but it's wrong, and so that's sort of incentive for them to open up the data. So yeah, it's kind of cool. So we've got 41 data requests. We've got people voting up and voting down stuff, adding comments, and then we basically, every data set that hits, I think, 5 votes at this point, and we'll see how we go, we then go and chase up with the relevant agency, and then we tell people where it's up to, and then we sort of try to track it as a bit of a public and fairly transparent approach to engaging with community requests for data. It's really kind of fun. Okay, so let's go into the last session for today. Any other lightning talks, any other topics anyone wants to cover about this space? No. Oh, yes. Come.
Question.
Oh, damn you all and your questions.
Yeah, I'll come down.
Okay.
So this comes up every year around June, July for Australians, and that's the perennial problem of filling in your tax return when you don't have access to anything other than machines running Windows. And my frank assessment is that eventually we're going to be forced to find one because I can't see any movement at the Australian government level of them supporting some form of HTML5 operating system independent way of lodging our Australian tax returns. And they are now, what I've noticed is that they've now started to move more and more of the really obscure corners of the tax return to electronic-only lodgement. And so I think it's only a matter of time now before they do the same thing for the entire tax return. And so for people like myself, which do not own any machines other than those running Linux, it's going to leave us in a bit of a bind. I've got to do paper tax returns because I can't use TaxPack. So, you know, what can we do to try and circumvent this problem? Because, you know, you contact them every year and they basically say, we won't support that.
So you just pirate a copy?
Well, I won't do that.
Because you run it in wine. That's one way to get it.
Well, the wine...
It's not a solution.
No. Well, the wine thing is interesting because I looked into it again this year and I found just as many people saying it bombed out on me as who said it actually worked for them. And there's a little interesting thing in the terms and conditions that basically say that, you know, I think the problem if you run it under wine, if something goes wrong, and as far as I can tell, there's a fairly good chance that something's going to go wrong. You run it under wine, I'm not actually convinced that the protections that are afforded to you as a user of the TaxPack software are actually going to be afforded to you if the software screws up your tax return. Because they'll just come back and say you're not running it on a supported system, therefore you're liable. I expect you'll find yourself in very murky legal territory if you try and pull that, and if something goes wrong. And as I said, I'm not comfortable with TaxPack running under wine at the moment because a significant number of people in 2013 were reporting, oh, it's stuffed up here or it's stuffed up there, or even more worrying, it's stuffed up at the last final submit bit and I don't know if it's actually submitted or not. And what do you do? So yeah, I mean, wine would be a workaround if you could rely on it, but the nature of wine and the nature of the ATO's application, plus this fact that, you know, this is a fairly important legal document that you're trying to submit, I'm not actually convinced that it's a safe way to proceed.
Screenshot of every single step.
Yeah.
And document it.
That's extremely tedious, and we shouldn't have to do it.
So anyone else want to comment on that, please come up and so we can speak into the microphone, but yeah, please do. Hold on. Or I can run around with the microphone. Oh, okay, I'll do that, fine. Oh. Who wants to talk about this? Who wants to respond to this? Anyone? There you go. I'm here.
She's just done the walking for you.
Yes.
Okay. Everyone can hear me okay? Brilliant. So just picking up on the legal argument, there's actually a concept under the 1974 Trade Practices Act, which I think was recently updated, called third line forcing. The Australian government as a legal entity is essentially third line forcing you to use another product to submit your tax return. This hasn't actually been tested under the Australian legal system, but it would be a very interesting legal argument to run. The Australian government requires you to use a specific product to lodge a tax return, which you're legally required to do. They're third line forcing you to use a product. No one's actually tested this, and I'd love someone to test it.
So what's the actual allowances of that act that you're referring to? Like, is it like what are you challenging? Are you challenging the fact that they are forcing you to use a single product?
The Trade Practices Act. Yep. The Trade Practices Act of 1974 has specific clauses about third line forcing. So the concept of third line forcing is if I want you to use product A, and you have to use product A plus B to be able to use product A, you're essentially forcing a third line product onto the consumer. It's protected under law. That's essentially what's happening here, but no one's actually tested it in the courts.
The Act is saying that that's not allowed, is that?
That's correct. It's illegal under the Trade Practices Act.
Well, if anybody has a couple $1 million and you can challenge it in the High Court, go for it.
It's just a quick comment, and just to show that there is hope. Back in Brazil, they are already supporting multiple operating systems. It's unfortunately a Java-based application, not a modern web application yet, but you can do your tax return on Linux, Mac, and Windows if you wish to.
Great, that's what we need here.
So.
Anyone else?
I did have a question, but actually it was addressed by that company.
Okay, cool. And then
There's one over there too.
Could this come into the open data thing? If am I not?
Oh yes, no, you are.
Instead of coming up with an application for Linux and Mac and blah 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 blah, they released the form data in a better format so someone else can come along with the. Should totes put it up there on the public ideas, yeah.
I guess the potential issue there is I can imagine the government's going to say, oh, privacy, we can't do that. Tax return stuff is sensitive. And
No. But government, but this is where we get it. So one of the things that I'm being recorded, aren't I? I was a little cheeky to put up here as well, but the data request site, you might notice it says government data sets or APIs.
Yeah.
So request it as an API. And then if enough people vote for it, then we can then go to the ATO as the data.gov.au, so I've got my data.gov.au hat on right now, and say, so this API has been requested, is there any way to fulfill this, and see what happens. So I'll come back to that in a second though.
Sure.
Who else had a comment?
Open e-tax.
Well, you can go and make a request right now. Yeah, you got to active community.
Open e-tax, that works. 5. How many are in the room? From Australia.
So everyone here votes.
From Australia, yeah.
I'm just thinking a hack you could do. You could fire up an Amazon micro instance running Windows Server and just run it on there. It wouldn't cost you anything.
True. A lot more hassle than it's worth, though, really.
Anyone else? Oh, one more over here, sorry.
Yeah.
Who am I? Sorry, just give it.
Hey, is this working? Yes. Just to possibly give hope, there's actually is already an API for submitting your tax return to the ATO and pretty much every major G20 tax authority in the world, except only if you're a business. It's called XBRL, and it's an XML-based insane system, but there's an extant, API out there for posting, submitting, computer machine readable open standards for submitting tax returns. So hopefully, theoretically, they can read across and use that in a different environment as well.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with an obscenely nasty API is that no one will bother to try and use it. But yeah, I mean, that's good. That sounds like it's a good plan. Although the other thing too is, and I guess we've got to wrap up to it at some point, the other thing that having talked to a couple of people in government and all that, it does seem to me that if there's a priority for shifting these sorts of things so that, to open it up, make it easier for people, there seems to be a greater preference for the government to concentrate on the business side and just let the personal side just sort of languish without a lot of attention, which may actually explain why that API exists, but only for business. Because I've seen that crop up a couple of times where, business can do it this way, but if you don't have an ABN, then you can't, and you've got to do it this way. And usually the alternative way is a right royal pain in the neck. So I'll ask the same question next year.
And I'll try to put comments in as well. So there's a couple of things there. There's the retrospective dealing with systems that already exist that are limited in how they support different users and different operating systems. And I actually know a lot about that particular example that I can't talk about. But it's worth asking the question, why? A lot of people immediately assume that the government are a little bit nefarious or or trying to be exclusive or trying to force a particular product or whatever. But in a lot of cases, that's not entirely the case. And and it comes back to ensuring that, and this is why, again, I got involved in procurement stuff. Understanding the ramifications of procurement of systems for government is really, really important. So is the standard that's been developed for the implementation of a product able to be reused? Does it fit into the existing contract? Will it cost extra money? How much money will it cost? Blah, blah, blah. So there's understanding why this is the case, I think, is probably a very important thing to investigate, and asking the ATO, look, not just saying we want it now, because we've all been saying that for many years now, but saying, why is this the case? What are actually the blockers to doing this? And why is it so prohibitively, if you're saying it's prohibitive to cost, a prohibitive cost to support other operating systems, including Linux, then what are you basing that on, and can we help you with trying to figure out, we would happily develop the solution for you if you gave us the system APIs, if you gave us, the standard, if you get, all those kinds of things. So, we're a technical community, we can scratch our own itch, you just need to give us the information, understands how to do stuff. So that's the first thing, is retrospective is always going to be tricky. But I think it's worth noting that proactively, the new EU government policy talks about digitising government transactions that happen more than 50,000 times a year. So using that as a case study to say, this is why it's so important to have a standards-based approach that is compliant, that is HTML5, approach that rather than having an iPhone app, having a responsive web approach that will that is inclusive rather than exclusive in terms of who it delivers services to and how those services are delivered. The government has an API account, all those kinds of things. So approaching government not just from we're really cranky about this, but rather the lessons learnt from this should help make future services more efficient, more effective, more inclusive, and save you money is a good way to put it. So just as a suggestion. Someone once gave me the advice, and it's been very sage advice. The best way you can change things in government is to offer a solution. If you can say, this is a problem because of X, Y, and Z, and here's how you can fix it, then that's going to be a lot better way to getting it changed than pointing out the issues. Okay, so let's go into this last session. So the idea